All right, so, that feeling, right?
Mm.
When you find something, you're like, whoa, this is full of great stuff. But at the same time, you kind of look at it and you're like, oh, this is a lot to get through.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's dense.
Yeah.
It's like, man, if I only had, like, some sort of guide or map to, like, pull out the gems, right?
Right.
Well, that's what we're doing today. That's what this whole deep dive is all about. And what we're diving into is something you shared with us, which is really fascinating. It's a session from Christopher McClure's Meditation Happy Hour.
Okay.
And he's exploring this really crucial dance between growth and stability.
Yes, and what's really interesting about this particular session as source material for this deep dive is that he is speaking directly from his personal meditation practice.
Okay.
Particularly from the practice of what he calls the two-way Jacob's Ladder meditation.
Okay. Interesting. So we're getting like a firsthand account of how he's working with these ideas.
Yeah.
Now, this two-way Jacob's Ladder, as we understand it, is his framework for moving between these concepts of matter and spirit.
Yeah, that's right.
So our mission today is to really dig into what he's uncovering about how growth and stability work together for him within this framework.
Right.
And more importantly, I think what you can take away from that for your own journey, whatever your goals might be.
Totally, because he's basically using his meditation practice as a laboratory for understanding this interplay between growth and stability.
Oh, I like that. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, so it's kind of like he's going in and experimenting and then sharing his findings with us.
Right. And one of the first things he touches on that really caught our attention is this idea of shock points.
Yes.
Okay, so shock points. Let's break this down a little bit. So he borrows this term from the ancient Enneagram, and he connects it to the work of some thinkers you might have heard of. Gurdjieff, Bennett, Uspensky.
Yeah.
Now, in the context of personal growth, what exactly are these shock points?
So in the context of personal growth, think of these as those moments on any path of development where you sort of hit a snag, where progress feels like it's stalling. He describes them as these knots in your being, or these hurdles that we all encounter, suggesting that these are points where you might need to expend extra energy to break through them. And have you ever felt that in your own life, that feeling of like hitting a wall?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like you're making progress, and then suddenly it's like you're wading through mud.
Exactly.
It's not always like a smooth upward trajectory.
Right.
There are these points of resistance that we all encounter.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is that McClure then outlines two different ways that he sees himself and others navigating these shock points.
Okay, all right, so two approaches.
Okay, so the first one he playfully calls mushing. Mushing. And the image that this evokes, I think, is really vivid. It's about trying to more forcefully blend the elements before and after the shock point.
Okay.
Almost as if you're trying to like ram things together to make them fit.
Right, like you've run into that hurdle and you're just like, I'm just going to try and muscle my way through this.
Yeah.
And hope that somehow on the other side, things will connect.
Exactly.
He even uses the word groping, which I think really gives you that sense of that feeling of just trying different things.
Yeah.
Sort of in the moment, like trial and error a little bit.
Exactly.
So this is a very growth-oriented approach focused on pushing forward, even if it feels a bit messy or like you're not entirely sure how it's going to work out.
Exactly. And then in contrast to this, he has this other approach that he calls wild.
Wild. Okay, so we've got mushing and now we've got wild.
Right.
This sounds very different.
It is. It's a totally different strategy.
Okay.
So WILD stands for Wholeness-Inspired Life Design.
Wholeness-Inspired Life Design. Okay, got it.
So this takes a much more deliberate, stability-focused approach.
Okay.
McClure describes it as setting aside specific times or specific activities for the different parts of a system or process. The key here, he says, is repetition, establishing a consistent rhythm or a consistent cycle. He specifically mentions a weekly cycle as a common example.
Okay.
And what's fascinating is that he suggests that this consistent repetition eventually leads to a bleeding effect.
A bleeding effect.
Interesting between these elements. So even though you're focusing on them individually at different times, that regular engagement, that rhythm that you've established, begins to create connections and influence across them. So it's a more stable and more integrated way of achieving that mushing, that blending of the elements.
Right.
Does that resonate with you at all, that idea?
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's the difference between trying to cram for a test and studying a little bit every day.
Right.
So mushing is that immediate, maybe more intense push for growth.
Yes.
Whereas wild is about creating a stable underlying rhythm that allows growth to happen maybe more naturally and sustainably
Exactly.
through that gradual bleeding effect.
Precisely. And this brings him to, I think, the really crucial point about the importance of balance. He emphasizes that both growth and stability aren't just nice to have. They are absolutely essential for sustained growth.
I see.
He even makes this very powerful analogy, I guess you could call it, where he talks about trying to grow too much too fast can actually be counterproductive. It's like a system that expands beyond its ability to support itself and eventually collapses.
Yeah. Right, that makes perfect sense when you think
Yeah.
about it. Like any kind of rapid expansion that doesn't have a strong base is going to
Yeah.
encounter problems.
So with this framework in place of shock points and these two approaches, McCore then dives into his own two-way Jacob's Ladder meditation as a way to kind of illustrate these ideas in action. He mentions that it involves 13 elements in total, but for the purpose of this talk, he's really focusing on the first few, which he calls the soul kernel.
The soul kernel.
Yes.
Okay, and this is kind of the core daily practice.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so break it down for us. What is this soul kernel all about?
Okay, so the soul kernel has 4 key components. The first is what's known as the dantian, which is essentially the physical center of your body located sort of a bit below and behind your navel.
Okay, have you encountered that concept before?
Yeah, it's a common focal point in a lot of Eastern practices.
Yeah, okay.
Then he mentions pulse, and now pulse, he clarifies, is one of 3 fundamental body cycles, the other 2 being breath and sensation. But he emphasizes that pulse can actually be a really powerful anchor for meditation, and even suggests that with practice, you can become aware of it in different parts of your body, even seemingly outside of it.
Interesting.
It's subtle but powerful.
Yeah, very subtle.
Yeah.
Okay.
The third element is the 6-pointed star,
Okay.
often known as the Star of David or the Seal of Solomon.
Right.
And he explains the symbolism here of the 2 interlocking triangles, representing a kind of cycle evolution or matter, returning to spirit, an involution or spirit manifesting in matter. He actually calls this a yantra, a visual form that's driven by the rhythm of your pulse. And for you thinking about growth and stability, you can see how that symbol of these interwoven forces represents that constant interplay that you experience in your own development.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's a really beautiful symbol, actually, when you think about it like that.
Yeah. And the practice involves using the gentle rhythm of your pulse to guide your attention around the 6 points of these 2 triangles.
Okay.
And then finally, the 4th element of the soul kernel is the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum.
Oh, okay. A very well-known mantra.
Yeah, and he reminds us this is a 6-syllable mantra with a very profound meaning.
Right.
Essentially that the whole universe is contained within the very core of your being.
Yeah, beautiful.
And importantly, he notes that this mantra is recited silently, and it's coordinated with both the feeling of your pulse and the movement of your attention around that 6-pointed star.
Okay.
And he stresses that this soul kernel, these 4 elements practiced together, is a daily practice.
Right.
It forms the foundation of the larger system.
Got it.
Now, this is where things get really interesting. As he starts talking about moving into what he calls the 4th dimension.
The 4th dimension.
Yeah.
All right, we're moving beyond the physical here, it sounds like.
Yes.
Right.
Okay, so this transition involves a practice that he calls contouring inner shape.
Contouring inner shapes, okay.
Yeah, and he actually draws inspiration here from the Tibetan eye chart, which involves visually tracing these very intricate diagrams.
Okay.
McCore adapts this by suggesting that during meditation, you gently focus on and trace the edges of any internal visual shapes that arise. So he proposes that this practice is a way of accessing what's often referred to as the astral realm, that inner landscape of consciousness. Think of it like when you close your eyes and sometimes you see those fleeting images or patterns.
Right.
McCore suggesting that we gently focus on those and trace the edges.
So it's a shift from the more grounded physical focus of the soul kernel to actively engaging with these internal landscapes.
Exactly.
Okay.
But he doesn't stop there.
Of course not. This is McCore we're talking about.
Right. This is McCore.
Yeah.
He then describes moving into the 5th dimension.
5th dimension. All right, so we're really going deep now.
Yeah, we're going deep.
Okay, yeah.
So this next step involves taking that 6-pointed star from the soul kernel and picturing it flattened out horizontally.
Okay.
Then the practice becomes wrapping the movement around the sides of this flattened star around the edges of those inner shapes that you were just contouring. So you're combining that more free-flowing visual field with the structured movement of the star.
I see. That's fascinating.
And he gives this combined practice a name, I-hat.
I-hat, right?
Which stands for hoop in the tree.
coop in the tree. I like that.
Yeah, and this comes from indigenous philosophy
Okay.
and represents this interconnectedness of all things, of creation of spirit and matter.
It's a really powerful image, isn't it? The
Yeah.
rootedness of the tree representing stability and the reaching branches representing growth.
Yes, exactly.
Beautiful.
And this I-hat practice, he says, is specifically done during a respite,
Respite. Okay.
a dedicated period set apart from daily life, often in a third world squat position. He even mentions a specific mantra that's used during respite, I am lucid dreaming, which hints at another layer of his practice.
Wow. Okay.
And what's really interesting is that his system continues to evolve.
Okay.
He talks about recognizing the need to integrate the infinite spine, another important concept, in his two-way Jacob's ladder. And initially, this integration within the respite practice was only partial.
Okay.
He clarifies that the virtual incorporation came about through understanding that each side of the triangle in that six-pointed star could be seen as extending infinitely.
Oh, interesting.
So by recognizing this inherent infinity within the existing symbol,
Right.
the concept of the infinite spine is, in a sense, layered onto the I-hat practice.
So he's not adding something new. He's just seeing something that was already there in a new way.
Exactly.
We like that.
So within McCore's system, he identifies these points where a shift in practice occurs as shock points.
Okay.
One before engaging with the inner shapes and the I-hat practice, and another before fully integrating the concept of the infinite spine. And this is where his experience with that mushing approach becomes really relevant.
Okay.
He describes trying to extend that initial soul kernel practice into his daily life, a kind of mushing by trying to force that initial growth.
Right.
But he found that it actually led to instability.
Oh, so it backfired in a way.
It did.
Okay.
He realized that he needed to return to the fundamental stability provided by the soul kernel.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried to push a new habit too hard only to have it kind of fall apart?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Oh.
I mean, I think that's a really common experience, right? You get excited about something, you try to do too much too soon, and then you just burn out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But then, as he points out, simply retreating back to that stability meant losing the growth energy that he just generated in his practice.
Right. So it's like you're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, you need both.
Yeah.
So this led to a significant revelation, as he calls it, which resulted in an updated version of his respite practice.
Okay.
It's no longer just I-hat, but what he terms ski hat vis.
Ski hat vis. Okay, another acronym.
Another acronym.
Break it down. What does it stand for?
It stands for soul kernel plus I-hat plus virtual infinite spine.
Okay, so it's like he's taking all of the best elements and bringing them together.
Exactly.
Okay.
So the respite itself becomes this focused container where these different elements are intentionally brought together.
Right, so the respite becomes this concentrated space for integrating different aspects of his practice.
Exactly.
Now, how does Wild fit into this evolving picture? The wholeness-inspired life design,
Right.
the stability-focused approach.
Right. Well, this is where the cyclical arrangement of his activities comes into play.
Okay.
McCore explains how he intentionally alternates between his daily life practice of the soul kernel and these dedicated periods of respite where he engages in that more intensive ski hat vis practice.
Right.
So this creates a very deliberate repeating cycle. Can you see how that structured alternation provides a kind of framework?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Like creating these containers for different types of practice.
Yeah. And it's this regular alternation, this dedicated time for each type of practice that creates that bleed-through effect that he was talking about.
Right.
The growth and the insights that are generated during the ski hat viz in the respite then subtly influence and enrich the soul kernel practice when he returns to it.
I see. So it's like the benefits of that focused work ripple outwards into the rest of his life.
Exactly.
Right.
He gives a really concrete example from his own life, reading books.
Okay.
He practices the soul kernel in between reading sessions and then engages in the respite practice after he finishes each book.
Interesting.
So this really illustrates that rhythmic back and forth and how stability in one area, the consistent soul kernel practice, can support growth and integration in another, the insights gained from reading
Right.
and processed in the respite.
Yeah. So it's not an either situation.
Yeah.
He's arriving at this understanding that mushing that direct focused push for growth and stability, which he's achieving through this cyclical wild approach,
Right.
can actually be incorporated simultaneously
Exactly.
within a larger, more holistic framework.
Yeah, and that Ski Het V's practice within the respite could actually be seen as a very concentrated form of mushing,
Yeah.
intentionally bringing together different elements of his practice. But this focused effort is contained within the stable structure of that daily life respite cycle of the wild approach.
Right, so it's like he's created this container for the mushing to happen safely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this simultaneous incorporation, he believes, is what fosters both forward momentum and the groundedness needed for sustained progress.
So to bring it all together for you listening, the key insight from Macor's exploration is this. Lasting progress isn't just about intensely pushing for growth, that mushing approach.
Yeah,
It also crucially depends on building in elements of stability,
right.
like his wild framework
Yes.
with dedicated times and consistent repetition. These two seemingly opposite forces actually work together in this really dynamic way to help us navigate those inevitable shock points and achieve more sustainable development from whatever areas we're focusing on in our lives.
And this brings up a really important point for you to consider as you think about your own learning and your own personal development. Can you identify any shock points that you might be currently facing? And are you perhaps leaning too heavily on trying to mush your way through, or maybe overlooking the importance of building in that stability and that structured integration?
Yeah, that's a great question to reflect on, for sure. And if these ideas have sparked your interest and you'd like to explore them further or even share your own experiences with meditation and personal growth, Christopher McCore mentions the Wholeness Geeks Facebook group.
Yes.
It sounds like a really welcoming space for further discussion and connection with others who are exploring these ideas.
And to leave you with one final thought to really chew on, consider this. In your current endeavors, whether it's learning a new skill, pursuing a personal goal, or anything else, which aspect, growth, or stability might you be currently emphasizing more? And what small adjustment towards a better balance of both could potentially lead to more sustainable and ultimately more fulfilling progress in what you're trying to achieve?
I think that's a perfect note to end on. So thank you so much for listening to this deep dive into Christopher McCore's work. And until next time, happy exploring.
Thanks for having me.